You're listening to another episode of Lords of Limited with your hosts Ben Werney and Ethan Sachs.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lords of Limited. My name is Ben Werney, and joining me on the line is Ethan Sachs. Ethan, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Ben, we've reached double digits.
Oh, holy crap, we have! Episode number 10.
Yeah, man.
That is awesome. I didn't even think about that.
Pretty cool little guidepost there.
Yeah, and you're fresh off an afternoon stream. How did that go?
Oh, man. Afternoon stream was good. We went 7-0.
Holy cow.
2 3-0s and then started a new draft and won the first game of that one. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, seems good.
How are you doing?
Doing well. I actually took the day off school today for a little rest and relaxation. School year's been a whirlwind to start with, and I was feeling a little overwhelmed, so slept in this morning and popped into your stream, and it's been a very relaxing start to the day.
I love it. You have a really full schedule, man. I can't, you pull like 3 12-hour days a week. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that.
That's tough, man. Good for you.
It's worth it. I love teaching.
How's the trophy race going for you these days with all your school?
Well, I have come back to drafting after sealed practice for GP Indy, and it was a welcome back, thankfully. I've gotten in 3 drafts since our last episode, so I'm up to a total of 24 trophies. I added a trophy, 89 total drafts, 177 and 82 as my record, with a 68% overall win rate.
Nice.
How about you?
I have secured 4th place on the trophy leaderboard.
You're a monster.
Well, I do like 4 drafts a day. I'm a sicko. So I'm up to 54 trophies over 181 drafts. Win-loss record 354 to 165 for a 68% win rate.
Awesome.
Yeah, can't complain. So I've got a pretty interesting roundtable for you. So spoiler, we're going to be talking about Cube on this episode today, but we wanted to do a roundtable draft of Hour of Devastation to keep things fair and balanced here. So I've got a pretty interesting one for you that I think is relevant for where we are like 7 weeks into the format. You ready?
Lay it on me.
Great. Okay, so pack 1, pick 1. You are looking at a pretty stacked pack. You've got Torment of Venom. That's the common 2/black, instant speed, put 3 -1/-1 counters on a creature, and then your opponent has to either lose 3 life, sack a non-land permanent, or discard a card. Puncturing Blow, 2 red for sorcery, deal 5 to something. If it dies, it gets exiled. Ambuscade, 2 and a green for the instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 and deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Ominous Sphinx, that's 3 blue for the 4/4 flyer that whenever you cycle or discard a card, you can have something get -2/-0 until end of turn. Appeal to Authority, this is the green-white uncommon split card. Appeal is 1 green to give target creature +X and trample, where X is the number of creatures you control. And Authority is the Aftermath, 1 and a white, to tap up to 2 target creatures, and creatures you control gain vigilance until end of turn. And your rare for the pack is Hour of Promise, 4 and a green, that says you may search your library for up to 2 land cards, put them into play tapped, and then if you control at least 3 deserts, you create 2 2/2 zombie creature tokens.
Yeah, this is a stacked pack.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a very clear pick. I would be deciding between, I think, Hour of Promise. I think Hour of Promise is better than Ambuscade, but I think it's close. And if you have a preference for aggro, I wouldn't fault somebody for taking Ambuscade, like if you just really love the green-white Exert deck or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's defensible to pick Ambuscade over Hour of Promise. Ominous Sphinx, and I think that's really it. I think I could rule out Puncturing Blow and Torment of Venom as slightly weaker than Ambuscade. And Appeal to Authority, while good in the green-white Exert deck, not something I'm really interested in first picking. So for me, it comes down to Ominous Sphinx versus Hour of Promise, and I think draft in and draft out, Ominous Sphinx is just going to do more rock-solid work for you as a 5-mana air elemental with upside. So I think I would be on Ominous Sphinx here.
Interesting. So I agree with all of your thought process. I think the thing you pointed out about Ambuscade for aggro is interesting because I didn't really consider, because this is a pretty stacked pack that you could take Ambuscade and theoretically wheel that Appeal to Authority if you were like trying to carve out the green-white aggro deck for your seat. But so I think in a vacuum, Hour of Promise is slightly more powerful than Ominous Sphinx, but maybe that's wrong, or at least that was my reasoning at the time. But I just haven't seen a green deck in weeks, and I took Ominous Sphinx over it because I didn't want to take Hour of Promise and then have to ditch my first pick after a few picks of seeing green dry up. That was my thought process.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I didn't articulate that, but that was in my thought process as well. Like, I think I agree that Hour of Promise, 3 weeks ago certainly would have been the first pick for me, but where we're at in the format now, that deck comes together so rarely, and Ominous Sphinx is just always going to be great, that was why I settled on the Ominous Sphinx for the first pick.
Yeah, great. So we're both on Ominous Sphinx. Your second pick is, you've got options of Oketra's Avenger. That's the 1 and a white for the 3/1 that can exert to prevent all combat damage dealt to it. Spellweaver Eternal, 1 and a blue for the 2/1 with Prowess and Afflict. 2. Firebrand Archer, 1 and a red for the 2/1 that when you cast a non-creature spell, it deals a damage to your opponent. Riddle Form, 1 and a blue for the enchantment that when you cast a non-creature spell, you can make it a 3/3 flyer until end of turn, and it has 2 and a blue to scry 1 as an activation. Raminap Ruins is the uncommon desert, the red one that can pay 2 and 2 red, tap, sacrifice a desert to deal 2 damage to your opponent. And Hope Tender is the 1 and a green exerter that can untap a land by itself or exert to untap 2 lands for 1 mana.
Yeah, this pick is not as tricky for me, especially after having the Ominous Sphinx selected first pick. I think the best card out of those cards you listed is Riddle Form, and it matches with our first pick of Ominous Sphinx, so I think I would pretty immediately rule out Spellweaver Eternal because I think Riddle Form is just better. Interesting to note that there's a Raminap Ruins and a Firebrand Archer and a Spellweaver Eternal in the pack, all of which go in blue-red spells, so maybe potentially wheeling something from this pack if you select Riddle Form, and I think Oketra's Avenger and Hope Tender are just enough worse than Riddle Form that they're not even really in consideration here. So I would be on Riddle Form for pick 2 to go along with our Ominous Sphinx.
No need for me to say anything. That's my exact thought process, and I took Riddle Form. Moving on to pick 3, you see Torment of Venom. Again, that's the black removal spell that we talked about. Desert of the Glorified, that's the black cycling desert. Countervailing Winds, that's 2 and a blue to counter target spell unless its controller pays X, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard, and it also has 2 cycling on it. And Vizier of the True, that's the 3 and a white uncommon exerter for the 3/2 that says whenever you exert a creature, you tap target creature your opponent controls.
Yeah, for this pick, pretty disappointing not seeing a good blue card, and I think Countervailing Winds is enough weaker than these other cards that we can rule that out immediately here, and we're probably branching into another color. So for me, it comes down to Vizier the True versus Torment of Venom. I think I'm picking Torment of Venom higher than I am the Black Desert, although Black Desert's very good as well.
Can we take a pause here? Where would you rank Black Desert in your black commons? In a vacuum.
I think behind Torment and Lethal Sting. Like 3rd, maybe? I'm trying to remember what all the black commons are.
The other ones are like Wretched Camel and Kenra Eternal.
It's definitely ahead of those. Yeah, definitely ahead of those for me.
I think definitely Torment ahead of it, but I think depending on what your deck looks like and where it is in the draft, I might take Desert over Lethal Sting sometimes.
I think for sure, if I've already got like a couple Wretched Camels, say like I wheeled a couple Wretched Camels in pack 1, pack 2, I'm definitely picking Desert of the Glorified over Lethal Sting.
For sure. I agree. Torment over the Desert would be my pick as well.
So for me, I think this is tough because we've already got Riddle Form, and Torment wants to go better with Riddle Form, I think. But I think Vizier of the True is enough of a better card than Torment that I think I would be on Vizier of the True here.
Interesting. I took Torment here because I think Torment is better with Riddle Form and Ominous Sphinx than Vizier of the True is.
I think that's true. Yeah. And could certainly be a nod towards taking Torment of Venom here.
Yeah, I like Vizier of the True, probably a better card in a vacuum, but I think it's really good in white red or white green, and not going to be good in a deck that has Sphinx and Riddle Form, or certainly be less good. Like even in good versions of blue white, Vizier of the True doesn't really fit.
Right, and I think part of this goes back to I just haven't had much success with blue black, so I'm a little hesitant. My blue white drafts have gone way better for me than my blue black drafts have. So with the turning point here, and I think probably the fact that Torment of Venom does go with Riddle Form might put it over the top and just make it the correct pick here, but I think I'm enough. I would essentially be giving up on Riddle Form, probably, if I'm playing a deck with Ominous Sphinx and Vizier of the True, right? Whereas with Torment of Venom, you're leaving the option open to have Riddle Form be great in your blue-black, like aggro-ish spells deck.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I grabbed Torment here, and then we move on to pick 4, where we see another Torment of Venom. Desert of the Fervent, that's the red cycling desert. Countervailing Winds, that's the cycling counter spell. And Supreme Will, which is 2 and a blue, uncommon instant for the split card, where you can either mana leak something or you can impulse.
So with me having Ominous Sphinx, Riddleform, and Vizier the True, and just having passed Torment of Venom, I would be in exclamation point why me mode, seeing this other seeing this other Torment of Venom here.
Yeah.
But I think after having passed the last one, I don't know. This is a really tough pick. I think I would probably be on, but there's no white cards here either.
Yeah. Well, there might be, but no white cards of note.
So I think Torment of Venom's enough. I think the general population's higher on Supreme Will than I am. So I think I would be on Torment over Supreme Will here and just bite the bullet and say maybe I missed it on the last pick. I think I would be on Torment. And you're certainly going to be on Torment here.
Right. So I'm feeling pretty good about grabbing that last Torment. So now I've got Ominous Sphinx, Riddleform, and 2 Torments of Venom going into pick 5. Pick 5 I think is pretty interesting. So you see an unsummon, that's 1 in the blue for the instant to bounce a creature. Another black cycling desert, a white cycling desert, and a Sunscourge champion. That's the 2 and a white, uncommon, 2/3. When it comes into play, you gain life equal to its power, and it has Eternalize for 2 white, discard a card.
Yeah, I would be thrilled with my draft here, having picked 3rd Vizier of the True to see Sunscourge Champion. I think Sunscourge Champion's great, and it continues to go up and up and up for me, and I would be snapping up Sunscourge Champion here and looking to move into blue-white and just say giving up on my Torment. Last pick, I would guess that you took Desert of the Glorified's the Black Desert here?
Yeah.
I would guess that you took Desert of the Glorified, but maybe not. I could see taking a flyer on Sunscourge Champion. I do think it's good enough to do that.
Yeah, I really thought about it. I was thinking, so spoiler alert, this is the draft from probably by the time this podcast is up, it will be up on YouTube. This is my 3rd YouTube draft. So you'll be able to see my thought process through this. And I did think about I saw that Vizier 3rd, and now I'm seeing Sunscourge 5th. Maybe this is a white signal. And I don't want to get married. Maybe we're black-white is the correct pair for this seat, and I can give up on my 1st and 2nd pick and be black-white, because I think Sunscourge Champion is great in that deck also.
Yeah, that's certainly an option.
But I did sort of stick with the Torment plan, and I grabbed the Black Desert. Just because, if we are blue-black, cycling stuff is so good, and deserts are just good on their own. So I did grab the Desert of the Glorified here.
I think that's certainly fine. I don't think you could say either pick's right or wrong. I think if I had 2 Torments, I still think I might take Sunscourge Champion, because I just value that card so highly these days.
Yeah, it was tough. I think I went pretty close to time on this pick because I was really not sure if I was supposed to grab the champion or not. All right, we'll quickly wrap this up. Pick 6, you see a Survivor's Encampment. That's the colorless desert that taps for a colorless, and you can tap a creature and it to tap for any color of mana. Aven of Enduring Hope, that's 4 and a white for the 3/3 flyer that when it comes into play you gain 3 life. And Apocalypse Demon, I'm not sure I could even say the text of this card from memory. Can you?
4 black, star for a flying, and you have to tap it at the beginning of your upkeep unless you sacrifice another creature, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your graveyard, I think.
Very good. That's good. That sounds right to me. Yeah. So you see these are the 3 cards of note, and I think it's saying a lot that I had to put Apocalypse Demon as a card of note in this pack, but just because it was the only black card that you could consider taking. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, with after just having picked Sunscourge Champion, I'd be thrilled to see Aven of Enduring Hope here, and I would be slamming that. I would imagine you took Apocalypse Demon, or maybe Survivor's Encampment. I don't know.
No, I did actually, but I bit the bullet here and I grabbed the Aven.
Oh, okay.
I was like, maybe white, maybe I saw the late Vizier just past Sunscourge Champion. I'm not gonna be stubborn, and if white's going around this late, then maybe there's only a couple white drafters at the table, and I can get some cards like this. So I grabbed the Aven. I didn't feel like I was missing out on too much by taking it here. And then in pick 7, you see a Traveler's Amulet. That's the colorless artifact, the 1-mana artifact rather, that can pay 1 and sacrifice it to find a basic land and put it into your hand. Ruin Rat is 1 and a black for the 1/1. Death Touch, when it dies, you exile a card from your opponent's graveyard, or from any graveyard, I guess. And Abandoned Sarcophagus. That's 3 colorless artifact for a card that says you may cast cards with cycling from your graveyard, and if any card would be with cycling would be put into your graveyard, having not been cycled, you exile it instead.
Well, I know you took Abandoned Sarcophagus here, knowing you.
You know I did. So I wanted to bring up this draft because when we talked about blue-black a couple episodes ago, you were like, I haven't really had experience with this deck, and how do you sort of navigate into it? And I thought this was a good example of just grabbing some blue and black cards. And now I think a lot of people would see Sarcophagus 7th here and go, I don't have anything with cycling. I mean, I have a desert, and I have a Sphinx that cares about cycling, but I have no cards I can cast off of Sarcophagus. And I want to say that that just doesn't matter. You'll get there, and that this is a huge payoff for this deck, and you want to grab it here.
Yeah, plenty of time to pick those things up. So I think it's interesting. We talked about me not ending up being blue-black, and I kind of navigated away from it here, so maybe that's why I keep not ending up there.
It seems like it, maybe.
So I think there were options for the seat to be blue-black, blue-white, or maybe even white-black. Do you remember, were there any white cards in pick 7? Or were you just off of the white train at that point after seeing Abandoned Sarcophagus?
I'll have to go back and see, but I think if there were white cards of note, like Catcher's Avenger or something, or a Solitary Camel even, I think I would have listed them here.
Yeah, I'll have to go watch the VOD because I'm curious to see, after diverging from you a little bit, how it would have turned out for me.
Yeah, for sure.
And quick pause on the YouTube videos. I just want to plug for you here for a second. I have no stake in these YouTube videos at all, and I like being successful. And I watched the first one on Wednesday during downtime, so I still lunched with you, and
Nice.
it's really good. Like, as somebody that has consumed draft videos like nonstop from Channel Fireball for the last, like, I don't know, 5 to 8 plus years of my life, at least, probably closer to 8 or 9. Your videos were excellent and on par, if not better, than most of the videos I see on Channel Fireball. So you should absolutely go check them out, people.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. I'm excited to do more of them. It's really interesting. It's a much different vibe than streaming. Like, it's a lot more serious, a lot more like talking about my thought process. It's tough to do, to keep it like lively and vocal for the whole time.
Yeah, and I think you're really good at it. And I think you're very articulate, and you have a very sequentially logical thought process. Like, that's even apparent, like in the show notes. Like, when you lay out the show notes versus when I lay out the show notes, they're like, when Ethan does it, it's always like bulleted and like very clean and organized, and mine are just like paragraph blobs of like train of thought text. So yeah, I think they're great, and they're very easy to follow along, and I think people would learn a lot from watching them. You should check them out.
Thanks, man. All right, enough of this hour of devastation nonsense. Let's talk about Cube, baby.
Yes, Cube. Let's start with the most basic. What is Cube?
Okay, so Cube is a collection of cards across all sets of Magic, depending on what sort of the restrictions are, but generally they can be cards from any set of Magic put into a limited set of cards, 360, 540, 720, some amount, to be drafted. So it's a curated limited set.
Yeah, and I actually learned what Cube was through Magic Online. That was my first exposure to it. So why should people Cube? Why is it good? Convince our audience.
So Cube, if you like to draft, which I can't imagine you don't if you're listening to this podcast. So if you like to draft, cubing is the most fun way to draft. You can build, so in Cube, you are basically, it's as close to constructed as limited gets, because the power level of the cards are so high, because you're taking, theoretically, the best cards from all of Magic. You're going to be having super high power levels and super high consistency in your decks. So you're going to be able to do so many more fun things that you wouldn't normally get to do in, say, drafting what is considered to be a great limited format, Hour of Devastation, but you can just do so many different things, and there's so much replayability to these sets.
Yeah, it's like having a limited set that's like repeatable over and over and over. Like, I've been cubing for, I don't know, probably about the same amount of time I've been playing Magic Online, since the cubes first came on Magic Online, which would have been like, what, 2012-ish? Something like
I
that?
think it's like 2012. So I don't know if I want to take a quick deviation. Do you remember, like, on Channel Fireball, they used to post Cube draft videos before they were on Magic Online?
I do. I remember watching LSV talk.
Right.
That was actually probably, I very specifically remember LSV doing one.
Like
that
drafting
was where he was
mono
mono
red.
red. Yeah, just
Yes.
talking about like, you should always do mono red. That was, yeah, I do remember that.
So they would draft on, like, an alternate, like, I don't know, I can't think of one of those draft sites off the top of my head, but he and some people would do a draft on a different site, and then they would go on Magic Online, build the decks that they drafted, and play against each other. So they'd, like, DIY their own Magic Online cube. But that was even before they were on. But that's, like, my first exposure. I remember being like, what is this? Like, what are all these cards? How do they all match up together? But it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's so sweet, right? Because I think you and I both enjoy building around uncommon, rare type cards that let you do sweet things in limited formats.
As evidenced by Bandit Sarcophagus in our roundtable draft.
Yeah. And Cube is just full of that kind of stuff. Like, there's never a situation where you cannot do that in Cube if you don't want to, because all of the cards are so good, and the people that design the Cube make sure that there are millions of those synergies.
Yeah. So how do you get into drafting Cube? Because it is a pretty high, like, Magic is already a high barrier to entry game, and then I feel like Limited is another step up, and then Cube is a step up from that. So how do you get into it?
Yeah, for me, I just thought I watched videos on Channel Fireball. That was my first exposure to it, and I watched people like Caleb D, LSV, others do it on Channel Fireball, and I thought, that looks super sweet. The games looked super fun. I play a lot of Limited. I thought, I can do that. And so when it was on Magic Online, I just jumped in and kind of figured it out myself through trial and error. How about you?
Yeah, very, very similar. I remember my first Cube draft on Magic Online, and I remember drafting it. I drafted a terrible deck because I was picking like just good cards, and that's, as we'll get into later, really not what you can do because all the cards are good. So you really have to be drafting like a specific archetype or a specific kind of deck. And then I got beat by a blue-green like tempo deck, and then I was like, okay, I'll go draft that. So like then I would just like light tickets on fire and join another queue, and then try and draft the deck that beat me, so that I like sort of learned that way. And I was also watching streamers and watching videos on Channel Fireball and other sites like that. But yeah, so it's very similar, playing and watching people, and then the you figure it out pretty quickly. If you have drafted before, you will sort of figure out what the good decks in that specific cube are, and how to get into them, and what pick orders are, and all that stuff.
Yeah, and if you're not interested in lighting lots of tickets on fire like Ethan and I did back in the day, you should watch us and other streamers on Twitch, and you should go find videos on Channel Fireball. I think the best way to learn Cube is watching other people do it, and you see what cards they pick highly and what the decks are. And that's a really inexpensive way to do it.
As much as I would love people to come watch our streams, I do think videos are slightly better than streams because people are going to explain their thought processes more fully. I will, if you are literally starting from scratch, read Duke's Cube Draft videos on Channel Fireball. I think are some of the best around. He's really, really articulate about why he's picking stuff, and he goes through all the picks in the pack. He there's hardly ever any downtime in his videos where he isn't talking about what he's thinking.
So are we able to look forward to some Lord Tupperware Cube video drafts on YouTube?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to be slanting stream more towards Hour of Devastation till the end of the format, but certainly throwing out some Cube drafts on YouTube.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So we just sort of touched on this, right? You want to be, because the power level is so high and because the set is curated so heavily, you want to be drafting a deck that has a plan instead of just drafting good cards. So what are some sort of general guideposts that our listeners can look forward to for looking at cube lists?
Yeah, I think when I generally don't, at this point, having cubed as much as I do, I generally don't look at the list of a cube before jumping in. I just kind of jump in and navigate my way through the draft. But you want to generally check out Planeswalkers, how many there are, how good are they? Mm-hmm. Do they seem to be some of the better cards in the cube? Like, for example, in the Modern Cube, I think Planeswalkers are some of the better cards in the cube.
Absolutely.
Whereas compared to in a more powered cube, and what we mean by powered cube would be like has the Moxes, has Black Lotus, has all those iconic Magic cards from back in the day that get played in Vintage all the time, and it's actually known as the Vintage Cube on Magic Online now.
Yeah.
Planeswalkers there, for example, are not as good, but some of them are still good. Some of the best Planeswalkers are still good there.
Yeah. Another thing you want to look at, and I think this is a big sort of like, I don't know, level up for figuring out cube, is lands. So there's a lot of lands in most cubes. And as Ben and I are talking about cubes, we're mostly basing them off of the cubes that are on Magic Online, which I think at this point are now 3 that are sort of in rotation. There's a Modern, a Legacy, and a Vintage cube. There was a sweet Twisted Color Pie cube that hopefully they'll bring back, but we don't need to go into here. But each of those cubes has a number of slots dedicated to lands. So you want to be aware of what the land cycles in the cube are, how much mana fixing is present in the cube, how highly do you want to prioritize those lands. That's going to be correlated to how many of them there are, and are there payoffs for playing 3, 4, 5 color decks. So having, like, is your fixing just going to want to be in the 2 colors that you are, or is the fixing so good that you can really just draft as many good cards as you want and be able to cast them off of your insanely good mana base?
Yeah, for sure. And another thing I touched on earlier, power level, how powered is the cube? So generally powered cube means what I said, Mox's, Lotus, Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, etc. And then there's also a lot of other cards that are considered just totally busted or broken, that are really easy to build around, such as Opposition, the enchantment that lets you tap creatures. You tap a creature you control to tap anything, artifact, creature, or land on the opposing side of the battlefield. So if you get a bunch of creatures on your board, you can just totally lock your opponent out. Balance, I know, a favorite of yours and mine, the one in a white that balances numbers of creatures, lands, and cards in hand. So you can kind of abuse that by having a lot of artifacts and fast mana in your deck. And Upheaval, the 4/blue sorcery that returns all permanents to their owner's hand. So that one you're trying to like build up tons of mana and then cast your Upheaval and float mana and then like redevelop your board way faster than your opponent can because their deck's not planning on an Upheaval being cast.
Right.
Another thing to look out for are 2-card combos that just kind of win the game on the spot. Sneak and Show plus Fatties, the Kiki Jiki Splinter Twin type combos with Deceiver Exarch Pestermite, Crucible Strip Mine, recurring Strip Mine over and over to blow up all your opponent's lands, Fast Bond plus draw 7s to dump mana and like do all kinds of insane things. So there are some super things that you can do in Powered Cube that are not going to be available in the Modern Cube that we're going to talk about in just a second.
Yeah, so you were talking about you don't generally check the lists. So I don't usually go and look at the lists because I will have played that cube before. But usually before they release the cube, they will make some number of card changes. And usually on the Tuesday, the day before they launch the cube, usually on Wednesday. So on Tuesday, they'll post a Magic Online update thing on their website, and you can check the changes to the card list. So I do always check that to see like what new cards are coming in, what cards are coming out. Like for a while, Balance Gargadon, which is a 2-card combo, was in I think the Legacy Cube, and then they took it out. They've like sort of just reserved that combo for the Powered Cube. So just you want to be aware of things that are like bases of archetypes that then might change or might be reintroduced to a cube. Those are going to be important things to think about before you sit down to draft. So for experienced cubers, what makes the Modern Cube different from, say, a Vintage Cube or even the Legacy Cube?
Generally this cube would be considered a lot more fair. Fair versus unfair is a kind of a slang term that cubers use to reference whether or not the cube is powered. So there's not going to be a lot of insanely sweet stuff you can do in this cube, but there is still some pretty cool things. But less winning the game on the spot with 2-card combos. Aggro tends to be a lot better in my experience in the Modern Cube. I think Mono Red and White Weenie and all those things, there's a lot less powerful reactive cards or like those 2-card combos that just win the game on the spot. So if you can get an aggressive start and get ahead of your opponent, that tends to do really well in Modern Cube.
Yeah, so the Modern Cube is, probably should have said this earlier, is only cards that are legal in the Modern format are eligible to be put in this cube. So it's going to be a lot more fair and balanced because a lot of the broken cards that have been made in Magic were made before the Modern era or are banned. So even if a card has been made past that and is banned in Modern, then it's also not eligible for the cube. So I think that sort of goes along with, well, you're not going to have a lot of busted, broken cards that have been designed since then, and if they are, they're probably banned. So you're going to be leaning on a lot of aggressive, early, lower power, or lower to the ground creatures and spells.
Yeah, I've found that your curve is super important in the Modern Cube because there's not a ton of mana rocks. So if your curve doesn't look good, I think your deck's probably generally not very good in the Modern Cube. There are exceptions to that, obviously, as there are to anything. But I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb for the Modern Cube.
You are probably going to face a red deck, especially in leagues. You're probably going to face a red deck in one of your 3 rounds. So, like, if you're not out aggroing them, like, how are you keeping pace with them? So they're very, very present in either they're going to be in your deck or you've got to be thinking about facing them when you're building your deck.
Yeah, another unique thing to the Modern Cube, I think monocolored decks are viable in all color pairs. I think blue might be the weakest, but the rest of them are all certainly capable of having a very good monocolored deck, and I think that's pretty different from the Vintage Cube. I think it would be rare in a powerful cube. I think you're giving up a lot by not picking lands highly and playing multiple colors, but I think in Modern Cube it's very viable to play monocolored decks. And on that same note, as you get better and you get more familiar with the cube, it's easier to tell, I think, for me now that in a Modern Cube or a less powered cube, if I'm getting cut out of a color. And in the beginning, if you're just starting out in Cube, you shouldn't worry about that at all. Like the cards are good enough that if you just want to decide, like you can certainly force in Cube. You just sit down, you decide, I want to draft whatever, green. I love playing green. You can just sit down and draft green cards. And if you try to draft cards that have a plan, you'll probably end up with a pretty good deck. Mm-hmm. Any other things you've noticed about the modern Cube?
I did want to touch on that point about reading signals, seeing if you're getting cut, that like signals are just hard to read generally in Limited and nearly impossible in Cube because, not impossible, but very difficult in Cube because the packs are not curated or seeded like they are in a regular
Collated,
pack. Like,
right? Isn't that the word?
Collated. There we go. Thank you. Because you're just sort of grabbing 15 random cards from the Cube. So you're not going to have that split of like some commons and some uncommons and a rare, and we'll make sure that there's at least a card of each color in the pack. Like that doesn't really shake out. So if you don't see any blue cards for a couple packs, that doesn't necessarily mean that the people to your right are in blue. It just may mean that there weren't really any good blue cards in those packs. So that's just sort of a thing to keep in mind, that you don't want to. I think I see when I stream online or watch other streams, people in chat I think are often a little too easy to go, oh, you're getting cut out of this color. It's like, well, you can't really tell that very easily in Cube. So I think because, to your point of aggro being pretty good in the modern Cube, surprise, surprise, lifelink is going to be pretty important. So there's not going to be any sort of like random life goes on in the Cube, those kinds of just cards that gain life, but incidental life gain is attached to a lot of cards, specifically in white and black. So you're going to want to be on the lookout for those if you're in those colors. The power level is pretty generally even, so there's not a lot of spikes in like really super like unpassable cards, but there are the cycle of the Titans, so Sun Titan, Grave Titan, Inferno Titan, Frost, and Primeval Titan. If you know those cards, those are all like 6 mana 6/6s in their color that have an enter the battlefield effect, and that effect triggers when they attack as well. Those cards, Consecrated Sphinx, that's the 4 blue for the 4/6 flyer that says whenever your opponent draws a card, you can draw 2 cards. There are some cards like that that are just like very overpowered and big signals, big pulls into colors. So those cards do exist in this Cube. There's just, I think, less of them than in perhaps a Vintage or Legacy Cube.
Right. And I think another mistake that beginning cubers make maybe is there are tons of insanely good cards, right? Like lots of mid-range to like 5-drop, 6-drop creatures that are absolutely just in any limited format a slam dunk, but they're not necessarily in Vintage Cube. So these Titans and Consecrated Sphinx are the ones that are like windmill slam dunks. And some of the other ones you can probably let go because there's so many powerful cards that you really have to be picky about what your top end cards are in Cube.
Yeah, I do think that generally, like another like a level up in Cube is figuring out that lands are an important thing to pick and they're an important part of the Cube puzzle, but also that like because you are getting this Cube is the best of the best cards of Magic for whatever sort of this stipulations of that Cube are for this, it's modern cards, but you're gonna have access to finishers generally. Now they may like as you said, the Titans are gonna be sort of the top of that list, but you're gonna, if you want a 6-drop, you're gonna be able to find a 6-drop, and often it's more important to prioritize early picks, as you talked about curve being very important. So I think it's sort of, you can sort of be like, oh man, I got a Titan, and then oh man, next pick I got this amazing 5-drop, and now I have this Planeswalker, and your 4-drop and your 5-drop and your 6-drop slot are looking pretty clogged, and you have nothing to do for the first few turns. You're gonna get run over pretty quickly in this Cube.
Yeah, and then one last tidbit I found for the modern Cube is that any creature with haste performs a little better than it looks, because the games tend to revolve around Planeswalkers, and you're being able to cast your creature if they don't have any blockers and kill their Planeswalker when they weren't expecting it is pretty busted. And along that same lines, I think Burn that can deal damage to a player tends to perform a little bit better than it looks, because it can also kill a Planeswalker, and I think the Planeswalkers are some of the better cards in the modern Cube.
Yeah, that's really good points. Yeah. All right. So why don't we get into some specifics about this list? So we should say that, again, the list will come out on Tuesday before, or the updates will come out Tuesday before the Cube goes live on Magic Online. So we're basing our sort of specifics about the colors on what this list looked like when it was out in March. So we'll talk about lands. There are a lot of lands in the modern Cube. So the modern Cube, I believe, is 540 cards at the moment, or was in March. And of those, we've got a lot of lands to choose from. There's the cycle of 10 fetch lands, the 10 shock lands, the 10 pain lands. Those are the ones that can tap for colorless, and then you can lose a life to tap for either red or green, whatever the 2-color pair on the card is. There's the Tango lands. I don't remember what they actually ended up being called, but the ones that they come into play tapped unless you control 2 basic lands. Is that right?
I don't know. I had no idea what Tango Lands was. I was going to ask you that.
They're the ones from Battle for Zendikar that can be fetched. They are the like plains island land type. Anyway, so there's those lands. There's the full set of creature lands, all the lands that they come into play tap. They can tap for 1 of 2 colors, and then also have some activated ability to turn them into creatures. There's the cycle of buddy lands, the ones that come into play tapped unless you control, like if it's white or black, unless you control a plains or a swamp already. And then there's the temples from, Theros block that are all come into play tapped, but scry 1 when they come into play. So the scry lands are there. So that's, I think, right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 60 lands. And then there's also some non-full cycles of those lands, of various lands as well in the cube. So a lot of lands to choose from.
Right, and of those, the fetches are the best, and then lands that the fetches can go get are very close along with the fetches.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've been pretty... And then of those non-lands, I think Scry lands might be the best. That Scry 1 attached to a dual land is pretty good in Cube.
Right, but I found those other lands are not high picks. Generally, you're picking those other lands up on the wheel.
Right, so I think the point about lands here is... You can take fetches, I think, are fetches and shocks, and I guess the Tango lands can be found are all like going to be good high picks. But as I recall from Modern Cube before, you get lands late. If you want fixing, you can get it, and you don't need to prioritize it very highly.
Yep, I would agree. As far as artifacts in the cube, there are some mana rocks, not many. There's like Mind Stone, Coalition Relic, maybe a couple others. And there are some swords, but there's not the best sword. So Sword and Body and Mind's not in the cube, but I think I saw the red-white sword, the white-black sword, and the black-green sword. So there are some swords, and the swords, I think, in Modern Cube are very good. Like, very high picks, and you actively want to prioritize them and play them in your deck, because the Modern Cube tends to revolve a lot around creature combat, in my experience.
Yeah.
And just having the biggest, baddest threat on the battlefield.
Yeah, those cubes those swords are really tough to deal with. I mean, as Cube gets more powered, you have a lot more access to artifact destruction, right? Because like there's Moxen and Signets in Vintage Cube, so there's a lot of ways to blow those up. But in Modern Cube, I think those swords are going to be sticking around on the battlefield when they make it on there. Why don't we take a look at some colors in specific, like black? What can people expect from like black as an identity of that color in this cube?
Yeah, in the Modern Cube, I think black really wants to be aggressive, and there's also a lot of devotion-based strategies, so like you're heavily rewarded for being mono black, which a lot of people, like there's a saying in Cube that mono black is a trap. I don't think that's really true for the Modern Cube. I think mono black's generally actively good in the Modern Cube if you can get it to come together. And there's also a smattering of control type cards as well that could go in blue-black control or like Esper type control strategies. So yeah, there's a lot of cards that reward you for heavy black, such as Phyrexian Obliterator. That's black, 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 black for the 5/5 trampler that crushes your opponent's soul, and if they do if they do damage to it, they have to sacrifice permanents equal to how much damage to it they did. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, the 3 black black for the 2/4 that drains your opponent equal to your devotion to black. Geralf's Messenger, the triple black. So there's like these cards that have lots of black in their casting cost, and then there's also like actual devotion payoffs from the Theros block in the cube. And I think those decks tend to play pretty well. Black's got some sweepers. We mentioned Control. Damnation is a Wrath of God effect. Black Sun Zenith is double black X to put -1/-1 counters on your opponent's team. Yahenni's Expertise is -3/-3, I think, to their team.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cards that let you trade life for resources, such as Phyrexian Arena, 1 black black for an enchantment that lets you draw an extra card on your turn, and you lose a life when you do so. Bitter Blossom, similar effect. 1 and a black, but it's for creatures. On your upkeep, you lose a life, and you make a 1/1 black Fairy Rogue token with flying. And then there are some reanimation effects, and that's kind of generally an identity of black in Cube, but not so much in this Cube. The only reanimation effects are these clunkies type spells, Ever After, Unburial Rites, Whip of Erebos, so you're not going to be reanimating some giant fatty on turn 2 like you might be in some other cubes.
Yeah, and then so when you're doing it on turn 5 or 6, it's a little less exciting. And there are some enablers for the reanimation deck in terms of like green has a couple cards that put cards in your graveyard, blue has some like draw discard type effects, but it's a tough deck to come together if it ever does. So I think because reanimation is generally the most powerful thing black can do, and it's not doing it in this cube, black is a little on the weaker side, and I think your payoffs for being black are either pairing it as a control backup for removal and sweepers, or going pretty heavily black, if not mono black, and getting the payoffs from the powerful effects like being able to cast Obliterator on turn 4, Geralt's Messenger on turn 3, etc.
Yeah, and then I just pulled out a list of cards kind of for each color that sort of stood out to me as cards that helped me get into that color. Because we talked about earlier, the power level for the modern cube is generally pretty flat. So these are some of the cards that are like standouts for black to me that are a little head and shoulders above the rest of the cards. Ashiok Nightmare Weaver is the blue-black Planeswalker. Bitter Blossom we just talked about. Dragonlord Silumgar as a control magic effect on a stick. Grave Titan, that cycle of Titans, obviously I think are pulls into any of their colors. And then a couple Planeswalkers, Liliana the Veil, Liliana the Last Hope. And Whip of Erebos I think goes very well in the mono-black type devotion strategy and gives all your creatures lifelink, which we've already talked about is pretty important in the modern cube.
Yeah, some decks just fold to Whip of Erebos in this cube.
Yep. How about blue? What have you noticed about blue in the modern cube?
So blue is generally considered to be the best color in cube just because it has access to a lot of powerful effects. I'm not sure if that really might hold true here, but it's pretty close. It's very counterspell and tempo based. It has a lot of bounce spells, more than you see in other cubes. So like there's, oh gosh, what's that card? Cyclonic Rift, that's what I'm thinking of. That's the one in a blue to return target non-land permanent you don't own, and then it's basically sort of a poor man's oh gosh,
Upheaval?
I'm just having a
Poor
stroke
man's
here.
upheaval?
Yeah, poor man's upheaval. Thanks, Ben. Ben's just going to take over for the rest of the episode. I can't figure out what I want to say. Yeah, so poor man's upheaval for overload of 6 and a blue to bounce all non-land permanents you don't control. There's also like Aether Adept, Mistraven, and Riftwing Cloudskate, all sort of mana war, like creatures that come into play and bounce something else. So there's a lot more of that than you see in other cubes. So that leads me to think that blue is trying to not sort of sit back and be a draw go deck, but also sort of win by sticking creatures, bouncing them back, then maybe countering them later, gaining tempo and maybe mana advantage that way. It's a very counterspell heavy cube. Basically everything short of actual counterspell is in there. You've got Cryptic Command, you've got Miscalculation, you've got the Dissipates, Dissolves. Those are the 3 mana hard counters. So when your blue opponent passes with mana up, be wary about casting things into counter spells, or they're probably also going to be able to do other things with that mana. There's like Vendilion Click, that's the 1 blue 3/1 flash flyer that when it comes into play you can look at your opponent's hand and make them discard or put a card from their hand on the bottom of their library, and then they replace it with a draw. So that's a pretty good thing to be able to do, but a lot of draw go from this deck, or a lot of tempo from this deck. It also has a lot of powerful, what I might consider unpassables, just because, as we talked about, the power level for this cube is pretty flat. Cards like Bribery, this is the 3 blue sorcery that lets you look at your opponent's deck and put a creature from that deck into play under your control. Consecrated Sphinx we talked about before, Frost Titan. A lot of the blue planeswalkers like Tameo, pretty good. Jace Vryn's Prodigy is I'm really good, like looter early and then flips into a planeswalker. These are all cards that I think pull blue ahead in terms of its like raw power level from the rest of the colors. Anything else you want to touch on about blue?
No, I think you said it all. I think it's important to note that there's 2 different blue decks. I think blue can go aggro with all those tempo creatures, Aether Adept, Mistwing Raven, that type of stuff. I remember last time I played this, there was like a really good blue-white tempo aggro deck.
Yeah.
And then it's also got the tools there to play control, just with like the classic blue powerful cube cards.
Yeah. Generally, blue is going to want mana rocks, like either be paired with green for ramp, which we'll talk about in a second, or it's going to want the few colorless ramp spells that exist, because blue's going to have a lot of things to do with its mana. It's going to have a lot of card draw, going to have a lot of card filtering, a lot of powerful top end cards. So if you're blue, I would be considering taking those cards pretty highly.
Yeah, and just a quick note, you mentioned card draw. I think in general, in any cube, card draw is better than it would be in a normal limited set because the cards you're drawing in Cube are busted. So if you have more busted cards than your opponent, that's a good way to win the game.
Yeah. All right. Why don't we talk about green? What's going on with green in this cube?
Yeah, I think green in this cube and in most cubes is all about creature ramp. Maybe has a slightly more of an aggro bend than normal towards aggression for maybe like a green-red color pair type deal in this cube.
Yeah, currently all the green-red cards all the green-red gold cards are all aggro cards. There's like Flinthoof Boar and Huntmaster of the Fells and Voltaic Brawler from Aether Revolt. So like a lot of payoffs for green being paired with red as an aggressive color.
Yeah, for sure. So green generally has all the ramp you could ever desire. A lot of one-drop mana dorks, as we would call, like Llanowar Elves would be the poster child for those. Single green for the 1/1 that taps to add a green mana to your mana pool. So there's those, like Birds of Paradise.
Noble Hierarch.
Yeah, Noble Hierarch. Not Even. What's the one that taps for white?
Avacyn's Pilgrim.
Avacyn. I knew it started with an
See,
A.
I can know cards too.
Yeah. We need each other. We need to keep each other on track.
There you go.
So yeah, and then you're ramping into these big finishers, such as Avenger of Zendikar, the 5 green for the 5/5, and when it enters the battlefield, it makes 0/1 plant tokens equal to the number of lands you control, and then it's got landfall for when you play a land, you put a +1/+1 counter on all of those plant tokens. Primeval Titan, we keep talking about the Cycle of Titans, but they really are pulls into all these colors. That's the 4 green 6/6 trampler that when it enters the battlefield, you get it search up 2 lands, which is especially good in Cube because a lot of your lands have abilities. And then when it attacks, you can also get more. Trastodon, the 6 green for the 9/9 that blows up 3 non-land permanents on any side of the battlefield, and then those non-land permanent controllers get to put 3/3 beast tokens into play. And Tooth and Nail, the 7 green like lets you search up 2 creatures and put them onto the battlefield if you entwine it, or you can cast like half of the card just to search up 2 creatures or to put 2 creatures from your hand into play.
Yeah.
And then green's got a lot of mid-range options as well to ramp into, which I think is actually very good in the modern cube, like playing 1-drop. I think green might be the best color in the modern cube because it's got mana dorks, which is really the only way to consistently cheat on mana in the modern cube. So like going turn 1 mana dork into turn 2 3-drop, turn 3 4-drop, turn 4 5-drop, and just being ahead of the curve of your opponent the whole way is a great way to win the game. So some of those mid-range options are Master of the Wild Hunt, Vengevine, Whisperwood Elemental, just very powerful game-breaking 4 or 5-drop cards. And then some of the cards that pull me into green, just any mana dork. That's the number one way I get into green. And I think an inexperienced cuber might be fooled by that. Like they might be picking some of those powerful mid-range cards higher than the mana dorks. I think the mana dorks are the highest picks in green, and then some of the premier finishers. But generally, I want to lock up my mana dorks before I'm worried about the finishers, because I think that the deck is open if you're getting the mana dorks. So the only way somebody would be interested in those Avengers of Zendikars or Terastodons is if they're going to have the mana to cast them. And the only way you can do that is by having all the mana ramp. The Garruk Planeswalkers are also very good. Oracle of Moldiah is 3 and a green for a 2/2 that lets you play with the top card of your library revealed, and you can play lands off the top of your deck. So great way to ramp and prevent yourself from flooding out, which is sometimes a problem in the green decks.
Yeah.
And then we've already talked about Primeval Titan just being absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point about like the mana dorks are more important in this deck than the finishers is true, because you're gonna get finishers. There are expensive, powerful things you can find, but do you have a way to cheat them out early is, I think, the key to the green deck. So we've been talking about how red is pretty powerful, aggro is pretty powerful, and sort of the red deck is known in the cube community as the fun police a lot of the time, because you might be doing something really cool and then your opponent just goes Mountain Goblin Guide and you sigh and just sort of go, well, I guess I'm going to lose this match. So mono red or near mono red is very aggressive and is really going to be putting a lot of decks in the format in check. There is also Wildfire in this cube, so that's the 4 red to deal 4 damage to all creatures, and each player sacrifices 4 lands. And so that leads me, if that's in the cube, that leads me to believe that there is a kind of red control deck with the few artifact mana rocks that exist, and that is a fun deck, I think. At least sort of it's like a poor man's balance Wildfire deck.
Yep, that is one of my favorite things to do in Cube, and I know yours as well from our
Yeah.
discussions. Also, our boy Greater Gargadon is in this cube, which was not in the
Yes.
Vintage Cube, which made me so sad.
Yeah, Gargadon is great with so Greater Gargadon
It's in the name. Like, you just can't argue with it.
you can't argue with it. It's great. So Greater Gargadon is a 9 and a red for a 9/7. It also has Suspend for 1 red. So Suspend means that you exile it and put some number of time counters on it. For this card, it's 10 time counters. And each of your upkeeps, you remove a time counter from it. And also, you can sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land to remove a time counter from it. And then once all the time counters are off, you put it into play and it has haste. So this combos with wrath effects, with sweepers. It's also like you can respond to people destroying your own stuff and go, okay, well, you're going to kill my creature. I'll just sacrifice it to get my Gargadon coming out a turn sooner. And it's just a really fun card. It does not look as good as it is.
It always overperforms. It
Always
always overperforms.
Like, all you need to do is Zealous Conscript, steal something, sacrifice it to Gargadon, or Sower of Temptation, steal something from your opponent, sacrifice it to Gargadon. Like, there's just a lot of fun little weird interactions that the card has while it's suspended. And then when it comes into play, it's a hasty 9/7, which is pretty sweet. So that's a pet card of ours, I think, for sure. I think it's also important to note, as we talked about before, there are 2 card combos in the set. Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker is in this cube, so that's 2 red, red, red for a 2/2 with haste. It also has tap to copy target non-legendary, put a token into play that's a copy of target non-legendary creature you control. That creature has haste. There are some infinite combos with Kiki Jiki and I believe 3 creatures in the set, or in the cube. Pestermite, Restoration Angel, and Zealous Conscripts. Those are the 3, right?
Yeah, do you know what I did not know? I did
What?
not know that Splinter Twin and Deceiver Excerpt were not in the cube until I was looking at the list today in prep for the show.
I didn't know Exarch wasn't. I knew Twin wasn't because Splinter Twin is banned.
Oh, is that why it's not in there? That makes
Yeah.
sense. So in March, I kept trying to draft Splinter Twin, and I never saw it, and that makes so much more sense why the combo didn't come together as often for me.
While we're talking about this infinite combo, also from Standard of Yore, Saheeli Rai and Felidar Guardian are both in this cube as well, so that infinite combo is present, even though it doesn't quite have to do with red.
Yeah, and I think a really common deck in this modern cube that's very good is kind of a Jeskai infinite combo thing. Like if you can pick up Felidar Guardian, Saheeli
Yes.
Rai, Kiki, and the Splinter Twin type effects, I think that's probably one of the best, if not the best deck in the format if it comes together.
Surprise, surprise, this is my favorite deck to draft when Modern Cube was out in March.
Well, and the reason that we both like it so much and the reason it's one of the best decks is because it's one of the most unfair things you can do in a fair cube, right? If you assemble these cards, you win. Doesn't matter what your opponent's doing. So if you can figure out how to draft this deck and you actually get the cards, it really does do more broken things than the other decks.
Yeah. So for the non-broken red decks, most of your red decks are going to look like aggro decks. You want some balance of burn and creatures that are hasty. Goblin Guide is one of the best cards in the set. This is the 1 red for a 2/2 haste that when it attacks, your opponent looks at the top card of their library, and if it's a land, they can put it into play, or put it into their hand, rather. There's Goblin Rabblemaster, that's the 2 in a red that makes 1/1 hasters every combat step. Hell Rider, Thundermaw Hellkite. Ben, you love this card. Gold Knight Castigator, you know what this does, right?
I had no idea. I was looking through the show notes that, we kind of take turns doing the show notes, or you do them and then I add stuff, or I do them and then you add stuff. So you had done this one ahead of time while you were maybe at work, I think, this week one night.
Yeah.
And I saw Gold Knight Castigator on here, and I was like, what? I it's very rare for me to not know what a card in Cube does, and I had no idea. I had to go look it up.
Well, I think this is the only cube where it makes the cut, because you're looking basically red just wants hasty, aggressive creatures, and Gold Knight Castigator is it's from Shadows of Innistrad. It's a 2 red for the 4/9 flying haste, and it doubles all damage dealt to you and dealt to it. So it's not great to have in play for multiple turns, especially because a lot of the decks in this format are aggressive. But it's a really good finisher for the red deck because it's just a hasty 4 power in the air out of nowhere. You also want to balance these hasty creatures with burn that can get creatures out of the way, but also can go to the face. So Lightning Bolt, Char from recent sets, Collective Defiance, Exquisite Firecraft. cards that can deal 3 or 4 damage really add up when you're pointing them at your opponent's face. Like, oftentimes when you're playing these mono red decks, you'll be looking at your hand. I mean, you've seen, like, Ramunap Red was just one of Pro Tour. Like, you understand how, like, red aggro decks work, and a lot of it is, like, looking at your opponent's life total, looking at the cards in your hand and figuring out, okay, well, I can point this lightning bolt at their face, and I can get this blocker out of the way, and then I can do 2 damage this way, and then they'll be dead.
Yeah, very, very similar to playing a red aggro deck in Standard, I would assume. And I think one of the, if you're hesitant about, like, trying Cube, I think probably one of the easiest good decks to draft. Like, if you just sit down and say, I'm going to draft mono red, like, I would say 8 out of 10 times it's probably going to be open. Yeah. Maybe not in the Modern Cube, maybe it's only 7 out of 10 times in the Modern Cube or something, but is a good deck and pretty straightforward, easy to play, and you don't necessarily have to know a lot about what the other deck is doing on the other side of the battlefield. Mm-hmm. So just a good way if you want to try to win and just have some experience with Modern Cube, a good way to get into it. I know Lee Sharp on Twitter just always forces mono red. Must be nice to sit down in your pod and just know that nobody else is going to draft red because you're you're in the pod.
Can't do it. I mean, I don't really like drafting the mono red deck, but if it's open for my seat, I'm not going to shy away from it, but it's not something I'm looking to do.
Yeah, similar. I would want the good cards to be wheeling, I think, before I moved in. Like, if I wheel a Goblin Guide, I'll probably move in to mono red.
Right, so I think it's important to know that things like Goblin Guide or Hell Rider or Thundermaw Hellkite are all, I think, signals that the deck might be open. So if you see those late, because for this deck to be a pretty busted version of it, it can really only support 1, maybe 2 drafters at the table. So seeing those cards late is pretty good. But a lot of this deck is based on, like, I'm going to take this good, like, this lightning bolt, and then I'm going to wheel this derpy 1 mana 2/1 that no one else will want, and my deck is going to be great. So a lot of it is based on grabbing a card you'll want and wheeling something. So you generally want to be the only red drafter at the table.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to note that there are, like, good control cards for red too, and that the burn, like I said earlier, does double duty as far as, like, killing planeswalkers if you're playing red as a control type color.
Ooh, sorry, one card I want to talk about for the red deck is Shrine of Burning Rage. So this is it's 2 colorless mana for an artifact that whenever you cast a red spell and at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a counter on it, and you can pay 3 colorless and tap it to sacrifice it to deal damage to a creature or player equal to the number of counters on it. This, I think, is as another pull into this deck that doesn't maybe quite look like it is.
Yeah, it's very good.
It's a huge finisher for the deck. You put this on turn 2, and those counters add up pretty quickly in a mono red deck, and your opponent's life total is shrinking, and this thing has 6-7 counters on it, and the game's going to be over for them. All right, last color. What's going on with white in this cube?
Yeah, white, I think, generally wants to be pretty aggressive. There's a very good, like, tokens plus anthem effects deck, just kind of a white weenie deck, and that has token producers. White has a lot of very good planeswalkers. There's a lot of Elspeths running around. There's Gideons running around. And I think the Gideons especially are really good in the modern cube because they can turn into creatures and smash face. So I think a lot of games devolve into, like, somebody sticks a planeswalker and then you either need to kill it or, like, get your own planeswalker going. And if you've each got a planeswalker going, Gideon pressures other planeswalkers so hard that I think it really is one of the better planeswalkers in the cube.
Yeah.
So that's there. White also has a lot of control cards. There's lots of catch-all enchantment type removal, such as Oblivion Ring. And it's even got some Wrath of God type effects. So most of these colors, I think, have, as far as, like, white, red, blue, and black in the cube, have both aggro and control components. And then green, really, I think, is pretty mono in what it wants to do. It wants to ramp and cast some big things, or ramp to help your other colors do their big things. As far as white on the control side, you've got the Wrath of God, the Day of Judgment type deal, and then Oblivion Ring, Banishing Light to help you clean up planeswalkers on the other side of the battlefield, or even pesky creatures, and then some premium removal like Journey to Nowhere, Path to Exile to help you deal with creatures. And I think if you're trying to play a control deck, you should just be aware control decks in the modern cube look different from control decks in the vintage cube, right? Because modern's more based around creatures. Yeah. So I think creature removal goes up quite a bit in modern cube if you're trying to play a control deck.
Yeah, these Wrath effects are going to be such high picks for control decks because they're really going to make a lot of the decks in the format fold when you cast them.
Yep, for sure. And then on the other side of things, on the aggro side, you got your token makers. As far as token producers, there's Hero of Bladehold, Lingering Souls, or a couple other ones that just actually make tokens. Spectral Procession's another one. That's the alternate casting cost of, like, 2/2/2 or white, white, white. to make 3/1/1 flying tokens, and obviously in this deck you're hoping to cast it for white, white, white.
Right.
A lot of 2/1s for one running around, and then Anthem effects to pump those up, like +2/+2. Dictate of Heliod is 3 white, white for a flash, +2/+2 to your team. That card doesn't look like much. It is a house in this deck if you get the mono white deck. So yeah, I think that's kind of what white is about there. Some cards that really pull me into white. A Johnny Vengeant. Baneslayer Angel's a great one. The 5-drop, 5/5 flyer. It's got lifelink, first strike, just generally a must-kill type thing, or the game's going to be over in a hurry. Hero of the Bladehold, also another like 4-drop that is a must-answer type threat, and a lot of those control type cards, the Ras, the O-Ring, the Path to Exile. Resto Angel's another good one that just, even if you're not going infinite with it, with Kiki Jiki, just continually overperforms and can flash it in on your opponent's end step to kill planeswalkers, functions similar to a haste card in that regard.
And there's a lot of enter the battlefield effects that it like refreshes, so it's very, very good.
Yeah, absolutely. In that blue-white aggro bounce deck I was talking about, a lot of those blue cards have return target creature to its owner's hand on them. Like Resto Angeling, one of those is just pretty backbreaking. Do you have anything else to add to white?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that I think because the format is so skewed towards planeswalkers, or at least slightly skewed towards planeswalkers because they're the most powerful cards, that picking up cards like Banishing Light or Oblivion Ring are really good even if you're not in white, because that catch-all removal spell is splashable. Those are like, that's a reason that I would want to grab a fetch land and a couple duels to be able to like get a free white source, a few free white sources to be able to splash this, so that you can just deal with that planeswalker, kill it dead, or deal with a sword pretty easily, even if you're not in white. So I would be on the lookout for those. I think those are pretty high picks in non-white decks as well.
So yeah, I think just if you're going to dive into Modern Cube when it rolls around on Magic Online, make sure you are picking the most powerful cards, some of the ones we've named here first, and then really trying to draft a deck and fill the rest of the cards out with cards that want to go together in a deck and a strategy. Like that, that'll probably set you up for the most success.
Man, starting this podcast, I was like still not pretty excited about Modern Cube because it's less fun than the other two, but now I'm just jonesing. I really, really want to draft Cube right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Even as sweet as Hour of Devastation is, Cube is good. Actually, I don't know. Hour of Devastation might be almost as much fun as the Modern Cube.
Yeah, I think so. I think that says a lot about how good Hour of Devastation is.
Yeah, for sure. We've got also some questions here. One of our listeners, known as Generation D20 on Twitch, emailed the show. And again, we encourage listeners to do that. We'd love to answer your questions on the show. He's got a few questions for us here. The first one was, who introduced you to the game of Magic, Ethan?
My older brothers played when I was really young. So I sort of learned through playing with them, and I was playing with like one of my like childhood friends a lot. He also played. But yeah, that's how I learned. How about you?
Very similar. I have two older brothers that started playing, and they got me into it. I specifically remember getting my first pack of cards. I was in second grade, and I had to get my tonsils taken out. So we went to Evansville, which is like the big city near Jasper. And on the way home, we stopped, and I got a pack of Magic cards as my like reward for being good when I had my tonsils taken out.
Nice.
So yeah, my older brothers got me into it, and they still continue to play. And my younger brother plays as well. So it's pretty cool at like family gatherings. We can sit down and do a little 4-person draft every now and then.
Sweet. Here's the next question here we got is, have you played any other card games?
I have played other card games. I am a sucker for card games in general. Magic obviously being my primary card game of choice, but I played a lot of Hearthstone. I haven't done that much recently since I started streaming, because and really with the advent of leagues. I think leagues are really what pushed Hearthstone out of my life, because the convenience of leagues, I can just draft or play a game of Magic, whereas previously if I only had half an hour or an hour, I would have played Hearthstone. That kind of restriction's kind of gone. Leagues are great. Yeah. So Hearthstone, and then I play a lot of just playing card games, Euchre, Cinch, Spades, Hearts. I would really like to get into Bridge. I haven't learned to play Bridge yet, but that's definitely on my bucket list. I'm going to learn to play Bridge at some point in my life. And I am officially the intramural Euchre champion of the University of Evansville.
That's awesome. I love Euchre.
Sick brags.
That is a sick brag. You're not as high on Euchre, right? You don't like it as much.
No, Euchre is like the pleb casual card game. Spades is where it's at.
Wow.
Spades and Cinch.
So this is such a random non sequitur, but so this, like, you get those like flashback Facebook photos, like, this is what you were doing 3 years ago or whatever. So I was in this production of Othello that I had like an hour Basically, there's like an hour in the play where it's just like the four main characters, and so me and three other people would play euchre for an hour backstage every show.
Nice.
And so that like photo of us playing came up. I just missed that. I love that game so much. It's so fun. But I guess it's kind of easy, but I think that's why it's a good one for, you don't often find sickos like yourself who are just like always willing to just like learn any new game and play any sort of complicated game. It's like a pretty good, still has some strategy to it, but it goes quickly. But yeah, I like euchre a lot.
So how about you? Have you played any other card games?
Yeah, I actually played a lot of poker. Not so much anymore, but I used to. So it used to be like legal online, and it is not anymore, except for in 3 states. But I used to play online poker a lot. It was like sort of part of my income. So that was like there was like a brief overlap for my obsession of Magic and poker at the same time, but then poker didn't like sort of stopped being a viable thing to do online. So then I just started playing Magic a lot. But yeah, poker's basically the number one game. I've played some euchre. I've played, some hearts, some spades, but that's about it. No other like fantasy like trading card games. And I've dabbled in Hearthstone just a little bit, but only on like Wednesday downtimes.
So do you, when you say like poker, like full on, like all the in-depth poker strategy, like have you read strategy on how to play poker and things like that?
Yeah, I used to be like I've read a lot of books, watched a lot of videos, I've played a lot.
So is that like specifically Hold'em or like
specifically Texas No Limit Texas Hold'em? Yeah,
very cool. Yeah, I love playing poker. My friends in high school, we played a lot of poker. I've never like dived into like being a serious poker player, but we played a lot of like bring your bag of change and play like 5 cent, 10 cent, like dealer's choice games, or we have every once in a while we do like a $10 game of Hold'em or whatever. But yeah, I've never done it very seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'd be good. There's like a reason why there's so much overlap between professional Magic players and professional poker players. The skill set for the games are very similar.
Yeah, cool. And then he's got one more question for us here, a little more of a serious type question. When is curve more important than power level? I've watched a number of your drafts where you ended up with a with a 3-drop dong curve, patent pending.
Patent pending, yeah.
But won the games in dominant fashion. So am I overvaluing my 2-drop, 3-drop, and 4-drop ratio? What do you think about that?
Okay, so I think, one, that this is set dependent. So you can look at sort of the most aggressive sets, like I didn't play during this format, but Triple Zendikar, people sort of reference that as being a very aggressive set, and I have played it since when they flashed it back on Magic Online. So in that kind of format, your curve is super important, probably more important than anything. You just like want whatever 1-drops and 2-drops you can get. It doesn't really matter what they say, but like 2 mana 2/1s, 2 mana 2/2s were like the all-star. So a 3-drop dong curve, as he so puts it, would not have done well in those formats. In a format like Hour of Devastation Amonkhet, it's not as aggressive. Certainly you can have good red-white aggro decks, good green-white aggro decks, but the format is pretty diverse and there are mid-range and control decks as well. And I think in that kind of format, you don't need to have just a 2-mana 2/2 when a Sunscourge champion on turn 3 would do just as good, right? Having a 3-mana 2/3 that's going to gain you a little life is going to do way more than just the Defiant Kenra, that random 1 and a red 2/2 from Hour of Devastation. So I think you want to look at, one, what the sort of pace of the format is for your curve, and also it's matchup dependent as well. So you may find that some 2-mana 2/2s are good against some decks, and then side them out against other decks, or side them in against other decks, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think your answer is spot on of format dependent, and I think specifically in Hour of Devastation, it's much less so more than other formats. I think in Hour of Devastation, card quality is kind of what reigns supreme here, because the format's a little bit slower. So if your 3-drops are insanely good, it doesn't matter that you have a lot of 3-drops, because you're going to probably have the time to cast all of them as long as you build your curve correctly. And then what you said about sideboarding in stuff, like if you find you're going to get tempoed out by blue-red spells or a green-white exert beatdown deck, then bring in, change your curve so it's better out of the sideboard to match up against those aggro decks. But I think in general in this format, curve is less important and power level is much more important.
Agree. I think it's a great place to end the episode.
I agree as well. All right, so next episode, we're looking forward to wrapping up Hour of Devastation. I cannot believe that the format is already almost over.
I know. It came... It was beautiful, it evolved, and it'll be gone.
Yeah, so we're going to maybe talk about a little more cube stuff and definitely wrap up Hour of Devastation. And the following week is already time for the set review for our next step.
I'm really excited about the Ixalan set review. I feel like we kind of got like a little pass with Hour of Devastation because like it was similar to Amonkhet, so we already sort of had a base level of reviewing it. It'll be really interesting to do the set review of a fresh set.
Yeah, I am absolutely looking forward to talking about pirates and dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Thank you to Salty Pretzels, as usual, for our intro and outro music. He's also streaming on Twitch these days. Make sure you pop over to his channel and give it a listen. Very, very cool stuff going on over there.
And if you're on Twitch, come check out me and Ben as well. We're streaming Magic nearly every day at twitch.tv/Lord Tupperware, that's me, and twitch.tv/Mr. Metronome, that's Ben. Both of us can be found on Twitter under those same usernames, Lord Tupperware and Mr. Metronome. Shoot us a question. Check out our deck picks there. We'd love to hear from you. What, yeah. I can't say deck picks?
You can say deck picks.
What's wrong?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all. And I just want to plug again your YouTube videos. It's really good stuff, and people need to go check those out. They're excellent.
Thanks, man. Yeah, we don't have a clean YouTube URL yet, but you can check that out. There's a link to the YouTube channel on my Twitch page, and also posts for those YouTube videos will be on Twitter whenever they come out.
Anybody's got feedback about the show or questions, send us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com like our friend Generation D20 did. We would love to hear from more of you.
Yeah, thanks everybody so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Yep, thanks everybody. See you later.